Hello and welcome to this Rain Taxi virtual event. I'm Eric Lorber. I'm the director of Rain Taxi. If you don't know about us, we are a nonprofit organization that champions aesthetically adventurous literature. Tonight's featured title is a great example of that. Our work revolves around a quarterly magazine of critical writing. I'm holding here our new spring issue, and if you would like to hold it too, we would love to mail you a copy. Check out our website anytime after tonight's event to see if you might be interested. If you are, you might want to become a Rain Taxi member and get our forthcoming issues sent to your mailbox as well. Another way we advocate for literature is through events like tonight's. Many of them are free to attend, as this one is, but if you're able to pitch in a little something, feel free to use the donate button at the bottom of your screen. We're privileged to receive funding from places like the National Endowment for the Arts and the Minnesota State Arts Board, but our most vital supporters are individuals like you. There are other ways you can participate tonight on your screen as well. There's the chat, of course. That is already happening, as we can see. And there is the Ask a Question box. If you hear something tonight and you want to ask a question of any of our guests, feel free to pop it in there and we'll be bringing those into the conversation toward the end of the presentation. And then, of course, there is the Buy the Book button on the screen. And tonight, if you hit that button, you'll be taken right to the ordering page for Eladatl at our partner bookseller Majors & Quinn here in Minneapolis. And if there are other books on your wish list, don't stop there. Any book you buy while using that initial link helps support our series. I'll say a little bit more about books later on, but now it's my great pleasure to welcome our guest tonight. Like many people, I first read the work of Sesshu when his incredible novel Atomic Aztecs came out. It was a revelation and an exhilarating feeling to feel the genre of fiction being pushed in a new direction. That feeling is happening once again, and in this book he has a collaborator, the artist Arturo Ernesto Romo, who describes his work as folding folds and netting nets. And I want to say I am folded and netted, so I think you will be too as you explore their collaborative work. Finally, we are blessed to lead this conversation the novelist Tei Yamashita. Karen's works are extraordinary, and they include Tropic of Orange, I Hotel, and the most recent book with the unforgettable title, Sensei and Sensibility. We truly have an astonishing discussion ahead of us about innovative fiction. So please welcome our guests and take it away, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. And thank you to Raintree. And behind the scenes, thank you, Linda Stack-Nelson, who's running the show behind the scenes. Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here with Arturo and Sesshu. And Sesshu's a longtime friend, and yeah, it's really great to be here. Let's see. Let's start. So this book is out today, as of today. Its publishing date is today. So congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, my encounter with this East LA Dirigible project was many years ago on an online website or a blog? And I don't know if it's still up, but how long ago was that?
That was at least a decade ago. This project's been about a decade in the making.
And so talk about how both of you met. And how did the collaboration begin, and what happened first, the writing or the art? And can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, me and Sesshu actually met through soccer. I'm the same age as Sesshu's daughter, Marina, and we both played in AYSO soccer leagues in Alhambra. And so I met Sesshu through Marina, but we started collaborating as artists when I went to undergrad at the Maryland Institute College of Art. So my first memory of collaborating with Sesshu was actually he gifted me a copy of his Book City Terrace field manual. And I just read through that, loved reading it from Baltimore and being transported back into East LA, where my family has roots. And I mailed him through correspondence, I mailed him some drawings that were based on some of the poems. And he actually got back to me with some writing based on the artwork. And that's how our relationship between text and image started.
So Sesshu, what did you think? What?
Well,
How did
I've
it
long
develop?
been,
Yeah.
I'm the son of two visual artists. My parents met when they were art students at UC Santa Barbara. And they were married in a Zen wedding and lived kind of Beat Generation on the road lifestyle in the 50s. And so I've always had this visual arts kind of leaning over my shoulder from previous generation, and so always interested in poetry and art. My dad both wrote poetry and read poetry and encouraged us to write, and both my parents were interested in the visual arts. So I was always interested in collaborating with an artist and exploring the relationship, the tensions between the sort of purely abstract medium of language and perhaps the more elusive and material world of images. And so Arturo and I have been exploring that kind of tension in relation to East LA for over 10 years. And we have a website called the ELA Guide that where people are able to download walking and driving tours of historic and cultural sites in East LA that Arturo mainly produced. I did a lot of the writing of the text, but Arturo produced the maps and the images that are part of the website and so forth, the HTML.
So Arturo, are you the techie for this?
I was back when we started it 10 years ago. I don't know any of the new coding language or anything. In fact, yeah, if you visit that website, you can see it does look like a web page from the late 90s or something. But but I think one of the things that Sesshu mentioned is like when we started collaborating between text and image, you start to see that combining text and image gives you this tension. You can play with an image supporting text or elaborating on text. The text can give some subtext to the image and vice versa, but then text and image can also like contradict or interrupt each other. And we found that was actually a really suitable dynamic to play with when you're talking about history and remembrance. Like when you're talking about the history of a place and the social history of a place, the medium of combining two mediums and allowing them to contradict and support each other alternately actually was it was mimicking the way that memory works, and it was mimicking the way that we remember place and build our belonging to place.
Yeah, and part of the dynamic that we're trying to evoke in the book is the tension between past and present, between the present, which we see all around us now, but the contradiction between that and the past that is sort of hidden behind the surface of the everyday world. Yeah.
So what I sense is there are so many erasures of East LA as a place, but also what I always think about your writing, Sesshu, is the narrative voice of it and the cadence of the space and the voices of the people. So, you know, how is that? I guess that's the two conversations of the art and that narrative voice that's sort of, you know, generative and energizing. Can you talk about maybe the sound that's there too?
Yes. Both of us, both Arturo and I, are interested in East LA as a community, and in building the community in East LA through writing, through arts. We've both been community activists with various organizations in East LA, and attempted to use our work through various interventions in the community to try and build community. And is not without contradictions, and is not without sort of resistance and failures and interruptions. And so I guess, to get back to your question, that there's this polyphonic diversity of voices, because that's what community is. Community is not just sort of one person's unified perspective over the neighborhoods, but the coming together of all these different points of view and their contradictions and their conflicts. Yeah, and so that's definitely behind part of what's behind the sort of contradictory structures that are in the narrative.
Oh, well, before we go on, can you just elucidate one thing for everyone? How do you say ELAD? How do you say it?
What is the title of the book?
Yeah, the title. I know it says East LA, East Los Angeles Dirigible Air Transport Lines, but how are you presenting this? Am I supposed to say this is Ella? Come on, tell me.
I mean, Sesshu's talking about contradictions and multiple voices, and yeah, community work is not without its contradictions, and the recovery of history, and especially from displaced people, is not without its contradictions. And so we're playing a little bit around with the acronym. So the acronym is for East Los Angeles Dirigible Air Transport Line. So that's the fictitious company that is resurrected over and over again throughout the course of history in East LA in the fiction of the book. So the acronym stands for the company's name, but when you spell it out, it does have a TL at the end, which is common in Nahuatl language.
Yes.
And so in Nahuatl language, to my understanding, you wouldn't pronounce the L at the end; it would just be a hard stop at the T. So I think that's how certain Nahuatl languages are pronounced. So it would be Eladatl.
And what does it mean? I mean, besides the acronym, does it have? Is there something that it says and not?
No, I think I think what it means, at least to me, is the dirigible company in the book is almost a stand-in for the project of reclamation or recovery of memory, and of heritage and the past, like a counter erasure, a presencing, and so that's what Eladatl means. It's this it's a company, but it's also this creation, it's this creative endeavor that has to borrow from multiple places because the ground on which it's created has been displaced.
Or the air.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, we'll talk about flight. I mean, at the bottom of 178, I was reading, let me find it here. It says, in order to to fight back and give someone hope, we organized a new mode of transportation to challenge the whole grid. Yeah, pretty much. So what about flight? I mean, why the dirigible? I mean, where did that come from?
Well, I mean, dirigibles and zeppelins during the early part of the they represent sort of the failures of the 20th century. They're an obvious failure of the 20th century. The 20th century is littered with grand utopian social movements that blew up, and so it represents very much the 20th century. Everybody probably has the visual image of the Hindenburg blowing up. Oh, the humanity, so there's that obvious symbolism in the dirigible itself, because so many hopes were placed on technology in the 20th century. Well, and even still, there's always the hope that the internet was going to make the world so much smaller and so much more utopian. And so the dirigible stands in for all of those obvious failures, which nevertheless people are driven to overcome and to supersede, because people cannot rest on failure. They must survive. They have lives to lead, and they must go forward, and they're not going to be defined by failure.
There's something of the dirigible, I mean, in this that seems like it's like a steampunk. Is that, am I getting that wrong? Or is that an LA steampunk? No? Wrong?
I don't think either of us were aware of steampunk when we made it, but I do know that when I would Google images of dirigibles, that the steampunk aesthetic would come out. But that, to me, like the steampunk aesthetic does go more to like this English or Victorian thing, and where we place the eras that the dirigibles are being built are more based in the Americas, I think. And so, the steampunk, it's interesting. And there was actually a few moments, right, Sesshu, where we discovered things that things in like real life that actually happened that we had fictionalized in the book.
Yeah, we were both using our projects, the ELA guide we used to discover historical and cultural histories that we are not aware of or not fully informed about in East LA, and we mapped them out on the ELA guide on the internet. And in this book, we also used the Dirigible project to research the East Side, and curiously, we found a number of projects that existed in Los Angeles in the 20th century, in the mid 20th century. Most prominent among them was William Powell's Black Wings Aero Company, and his attempt to organize the Bessie Coleman Aero Clubs, to create a new generation of African American flyers or pilots, and to create an aerospace industry that would train and occupy African Americans at the beginning of the aerospace industry, and in order to literally uplift them from oppression and industrially liberate them. His closest associate, James Banning, who was the first African-American commercial pilot in the United States, is buried in Evergreen Cemetery in East LA. And none of these things, we didn't know any of these things. And I think they're still really basically like a secret history, unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, okay. We always think that the Wright brothers invented the flight, but Brazilians will tell you it was Santo Dumont. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's the other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The balloonist.
Yeah. Well, you state, I guess, at the very beginning of the book, you say this is, you state again. There's a statement against surrealism because that's French. But then, as I read it, it's psychedelic. That's American. So I was thinking, oh yeah, in the literary context, this is psychedelic. It's not surreal. And but then talk about Oscar Zeta Acosta. Tell me a little about, how he's in the book in some way, and also tell the readers who he is. And yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's going over to me. Okay, we can both answer it, I think. Oscar Zeta Acosta was an attorney, but also a writer of fiction. And I think where we came to him and as part of the project was discussing, like, how do you document a place? Like, how do you remember a place and a social history when we were working on the ELA guide? So the ELA guide was at the beginning a kind of simple project to create a series of maps that were like walking tours or driving tours of important locations in the people's history of East LA. A region that was often overlooked, especially in the portrayals of Los Angeles, mainstream portrayals of Los Angeles. It's like a part of Los Angeles that Los Angeles itself doesn't see or prefers to ignore. And so I think the project grew into this bigger pursuit of a question of how do artists relate to a place, and how do we document it as artists, and how do you fully capture or attempt to fully capture a true guide, like a real guide to a place. That's how I came to Zeta Acosta, because he was writing personal histories of his involvement in the Chicano movement. And there was a lot of fictionalization happening, like use of replacement names, pseudonyms, kind of maybe not very factual recollections of certain events. But it read to me as more authentically real, because it was coming from this one voice of many voices. And so I guess it goes back to kind of the contradictory aspects of the way that we're working and the way that we develop our approach to place and to history. But yeah, Oscar Zeta Acosta became kind of a controversial and mysterious figure that we started attaching one element of the story to. So there's sections of the book where some researchers are trying to find Oscar Zeta Acosta, who disappeared, leaving when was it, Sesshu? 72?
1974, off the coast of Mazatlan, supposedly.
Supposedly, yeah. So he was never found. So there's a section of the book where we're trying to find him and actually do find him.
And I guess I could add to that by saying he's sort of most famously portrayed, I think, in a Johnny Depp movie by Benicio del Toro, and they call him a Samoan or something. And so Hunter S. Thompson portrays him in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas as his sort of attorney sidekick, and calls him a Samoan. But he was a figure of the Chicano movement. Mm-hmm. And so so he disappeared about the end of the Chicano movement. And and so he represents that kind of both disappearance and resurgence of the Chicano movement. He's a figure in it. He's sort of well known by some people. His books, Revolt of the Cockroach People and Autobiography of a Brown Buffalo, were initially published by small presses in the Bay Area, but have been, I think, re-released by corporate presses in New York. So he's sort of an unknown famous figure.
An unknown famous figure. That's right. Because I knew him from Hunter Thompson's, Fear and Loathing.
Yeah.
That's that whole story, and I didn't realize who he was, until much later. It's fascinating, and I love that he's in the book and that it's psychedelic, not surreal. But speculative. And I've been thinking about the literature of people of color, which has made this turn toward the speculative. Not that it hasn't happened. I mean, you've been doing it, right, all this time. And the pioneers being Octavia Butler, Stella Delaney, and more lately, maybe Nala Hopkinson, Junot Diaz, Chang Ray Lee, Charles Yu. These are the younger and new writers who sort of live in this science fiction or speculative world. But I'm feeling that what your work is closer to Borges, Jorge Luis Borges, and even the Museum of Jurassic Technology. That's the feel I get from your art. And what can you talk about the speculative in your art and your writing, and maybe I'm off the wrong path, but this is where I think.
No, I think there are these sort of current trends and tendencies that are attempting to interrogate history through counter narrative.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're continually dealing with, the straw man that I'm always beating up is Hollywood. Hollywood has, colonized all of our imaginations through Marvel movies and everything else since Hollywood started, 100 years ago or whatever, and has totally filled the imagination of the entire planet with images. And I think the writers that you mentioned and ourselves are attempting to develop counters to that, counters to the tropes and stereotypes of Hollywood, counters to the tropes and stereotypes of the dominant narratives, counters to the tropes and stereotypes of the narratives that erase the kinds of people that live in East Los Angeles. And maybe Arturo, you could speak to how your images relate to counter narrative.
Yeah, I like the formulation of counter narrative rather than speculative, I guess. It's a little tricky. It kind of loops on itself a little bit because when we look to the past, to historic images or to historic portrayals or documentation, we don't see ourselves in the story that we always knew we were part of. So you look at a historic photo of like important people and important events, and we're not found in them. Working class people, people of color, and immigrants are not found in those stories, but we know that we were there. We were the ones building it. We were the ones making it. And so part of the counter narrative in my images is to place us back into those historic images that we knew we were always part of. So there are stretches. That's kind of the baseline of the whole visual language of the book, is to place Chicanos and working people back into the history of this industry.
So can I read?
Yeah, this seems like a good time to stop and show the work, and yeah.
Okay. So this is a letter from a passenger. Dear Enrique Pico, on July 3rd, 2002, I arrived at the Fresno station of your East Los Angeles Dirigible air transport lines looking for a flight to San Gabriel. To make a long story short, I walked to Fresno from Valley Children's Hospital, where I'd caught a small Eladatl shuttle in front of the supermarket in North Fork, from where I had walked away from a snuff out, where the mountain road, all hot, holding my toiletry bags, mugwort stuffed in my pockets in thick clarity. I was very tired, and your staff were hard to find and not friendly at all. Sesshu printed my ticket and said the airship would arrive 1 hour late because they were having difficulties up there. When Sesshu went on a break, I talked with Joey, who told me he would announce the arrival and that I should go to sleep because the flight was delayed. The chairs in the station were plastic, like cheap plastic ones, and they were scattered all over the station, tipped over and upside down, and I couldn't sleep at all. The station was big, and there was a dynamic echo. However, there was no food available because the concession stand looked like it had been burnt inside and boarded up. Everything looked bleak and sick. I watched TV for 5 hours. The show kept repeating, Paquita La del Barrio concert special, ESPN Sports Zone, Fresno KFSN local news. Paquita again. It was actually getting hard to arrange or locate my feelings. Joey wasn't listening to me, even though I kept seeing dirigibles come and go. First silver ones, then slightly orange ones, and then brilliant pinks, coral reds, dull oranges, deep blue ones, then black iridescent ones. Later that night, I talked to Sergio and he asked why I hadn't boarded one of the orange dirigibles. He pointed to my pink ticket. It's already gone, he said. The next one comes at midnight, and it's running late. It might be pale blue by the time it gets here. The inside of the station was all greenish by that time. Because I had walked through dense, hot pine forests, old logging towns, down into the San Joaquin Valley, across Fresno into the half-dead Bank District, Fallas Paredes, Botánica Poder del Mestizo, and dead Government Center, people waiting in lines forever, all depressed, to the green Eladatl station. I was tired when I was trying to solve my problems with Joey. And Joey was giving me the runaround. Sir, he said, I'm not responsible for you missing your flight. I've been professional and diligent in all my duties. Every flight that leaves, I announce here on this microphone on this desk. To this sound travels effectively up the wires to the microphone to the speakers, and if the speakers are broken, you can't understand what I'm saying. If the speaker isn't working at all, I've still been diligent in my duties to you and the company in announcing the outgoing and incoming flights. And in no way, sir, have I been spending the last 5 hours watching TV in the back room. And sir, I've also not been drinking this whole time. My eyes are just like that. I was kind of born looking this way. Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I have. Well, let me ask this. You know, I was thinking about. Okay, Sesshu, you're the veterano. And what do you call Arturo? I mean, there's a generational difference here. And so there's the boomer and the millennial.
That's an X.
What? No?
That's an X.
Not next. So, how do you, how in your connection with each other, have you had those conversations? What do you see as difference or change? And yeah.
Go for it, Arturo. You were part of that post-Chicano exhibit. Post-Chicano.
Post-Chicano. I was like, I'm thinking post-Asian.
No.
No.
I think we talk about it all the time. It's a really good question. I think there was a moment in the 2000s where there was like this post-Chicano, post-identity thing foisted on artists of color. But I don't identify with that identity, with that post-identity. I was, my parents part of the Chicano movement. I was informed, and in some ways my life was saved by the Chicano movement. I survived because my parents ground in their heels and resisted assimilation. And my life was saved. My connection to my ancestry was saved because of it. And so, I think we talk about, a lot of times me and Sesshu are talking about things and identity in serious ways, but we're laughing at the same time. I think part of our process is riffing, just always riffing with language and images. And that's how we try to negotiate our generational differences. But yeah, I feel as a younger artist, or younger than Sesshu at least, I don't find myself that young. I teach teenagers all day. I don't think of myself as that young. But I do feel like I've lived through this moment of kind of like post identity and kind of luckily, survived my way out of it. And I'm happy to see people, continue the work of resisting assimilation and reclaiming their identities and holding on to them and practicing building the continual process of building new ones. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question. I think there is an intergenerational, beautiful mentorship that is also part of our collaboration. But definitely the process of talking about all these things it's part of our process, and then it feeds into anything that we create. Yeah, it's one of those dynamics and tensions that then, like you said, Karen, are generative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's our responsibility? What's our future?
Well, Karen, you wrote this.
No,
great book, Karen.
Stop.
About the Asian American movement. What do you think about the current rash?
I need to know from you.
Come on. There's this rash of violence against Asian Americans going on right now.
There is.
And so you go back a ways. How do you feel about this moment?
Yeah, I feel that it's not. I always think, we've come over a hill and we're, there's some, and I go over the hill and all of a sudden we have to deal with the same shit. And I just, it's a continuing battle. There's a moment in your book where I think you say that we're chained to the war for freedom. And I thought, there you go. And I was like, I keep getting dragged along to on this path, and I don't know the answers anymore. I feel very frustrated. I can imagine that another generation, my children and my students, it's very frustrating. But think about us. I mean, I feel that we failed. We failed you, and that's
Well, Karen, that line actually is a quote, a direct quote from Oscar Zeta Acosta. And I had a neighbor, Carlos Montes, who was co-founder of the Brown Berets here in LA. And so he's older than I am and was, one of the principal movers and shakers in the Chicano movement, who led the boycott, the walkout in East LA, and which I guess is like 68. Is that the right year? And Oscar Zeta Acosta was his attorney.
that's right.
So, in one sense, the generations come and go and they have their successes and failures, but then another generation is arising and people are coming. And I feel like, part of it is like, I don't feel an individual failure because I feel like we are all part of this movement. We are part of these generational movements, and the generations are all part of the community as well. And so part of the book, part of the narrative of the book, is attempting to point out unifications and commonality.
I sense that. I mean, there is the moment where do they walk through the doors of the general hospital, and then there's this life out there, and I think that's where you capture that sense. Yeah. Anything further to say? Give me some hope. Yeah. It looks like this is the moment where I ask Eric to return and you get questions from the larger audience.
We do, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We have several wonderful questions, but I want to chime in with all the thanks for this wonderful conversation, and maybe especially for that final exchange in which I think you really injected a lot of hope and perspective into kind of the trauma of that we're all feeling, and I'm really grateful for that. So yes, the audience has been very excited to be hearing what you're talking about, and some of the questions focus on the nature of the collective aspirations of the book, and I think that's terrific. So maybe if you could talk about the techniques, the strategies, the challenges of using art to represent the collective. Yeah.
Okay.
And these questions are for any or all of you. Yeah.
Do you want to say something about recent Rupture Radio Hour?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that it makes me think about is like when you're trying to create artwork about collectivity and about community, you have to do it from within community. That would be the best. You can't just drop into a community and like report on them or something. You have to be part of the community, which means that you're creating work about yourself. That's where things start folding into one another. You are part of the community that you're creating the artwork about. The artwork is about you. It's about your observations. And like Sesshu was saying, it's kind of like polyphonic and multi-layered. And the community also is the generations after us and the generations before us. And so when you start with that premise, I think collaboration becomes really important. And one of the other ways that I feel like our process, me and Sesshu's process, is a little bit different than or one of the reasons I feel our process is counter narrative is that it also de-emphasizes like this idea of like artist as lone genius, because that doesn't really exist. Like an artist is never isolated from the society, place, people that they live with. And so Sesshu's mentioning a program called the Recent Rupture Radio Hour, which was just another node of the many noted parts of this book. Like the text of the book and the narrative of the book is just one part of like a series of constellations and practices that we were working on in the production of the book. One of which was a performance that was ostensibly a radio show. It was in the format of a radio show, an interview radio show, that didn't get broadcast anywhere, but was a live performance that was about community. And so we brought in people like Rosalio Munoz, a Chicano activist and anti-war activist. We brought in my cousin, Reyes Flores, shout out to Reyes, best urban chicken farmer in Glassell Park. But the premise of the baseline premise of the radio program was that there's no like lone genius, like we're like community is made and filled with geniuses. And that's kind of like the only way it works.
And so we had people like Sandra de la Losa on the show, Reem Al-Qadi, an Iraqi American artist, and we performed this at Cal State LA, at UCLA, at the DA Cultural Center in Pomona and other venues in and around Los Angeles. And part of that was to engage in polyphonic community voices and have an exchange of artists with their community and have a dialogue with the community about arts in the community. So that gets replicated in some of the sort of interview sections of Eladatl.
Another thing that I forgot to mention, and Sesshu, a lot of times these radio programs would come about because one of us would be asked to either read, in Sesshu's case, or in my case, to do an artist talk. And so, just inherent in like being invited to speak as a lone artist, we were trying to challenge that by saying, thank you for the invitation. We're going to bring along our whole community.
Wow, what a great answer to that question. And it actually leads into another one, which is about collaboration. And not only just now, but throughout the talk, I think you've alluded to the virtues of collaboration. Someone is asking, what are the difficulties? What are the sort of challenges? Are there moments when it's like, oh, this would be easier to do alone? Maybe not the whole thing, but is there a part that like, oh, this is something I need to do alone?
You can take that one first.
Herding cats. What are the difficulties? You name it. Yeah. I guess one of the big difficulties I think is the kind of culture of individualism that we all live in, and how people are conditioned to think that they are alone somehow, and that if you ask them to do something, it becomes somehow transactional. Like, what am I going to get for that, or what will you give me, or what's the exchange going to be, and is there like an equal power relationship, and so on and so forth, and in some sense, like that condition is like a trap that it traps people in this non-collaborative, non-community of just thinking about themselves as being alone, when actually they're surrounded by millions of people at every moment, at all times. You know, maybe in the funk of that individualism, but still, like everybody's together.
Right.
Maybe that doesn't answer the question.
I think, yeah, that's been my experience too. There is a process of like to collaborate with people. Like most of my artistic practice is collaborative. I haven't done any major projects that haven't been collaborative in the last 10 years or so. And yeah, it's a process of stripping away those ideologies of hyper individualism. When you're working with other people, you need to face those challenges. Those challenges are not permanent, though. They're not permanent, and they're also not they're not obstacles to creation, I would say. Like if somebody's interested in forming a collaborative practice, I wouldn't say that the idea of herding cats, like that's not the obstacle. That's just a feature of the creative process when you're collaborating.
Right. It's so great that you all really delved into Zeta Acosta and the sort of formative role there. And someone is asking, are there other people, and whether they're represented in the book, or maybe not in the book, but having had an inspirational force like that behind this narrative, or this counter narrative?
That's a good question. I like that.
Yes, that's a great question.
Go for it. Asco.
Yeah,
Lawrence Ferlinghetti.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's our community of artists. Asco for sure. 1960s, 70s, and 80s Chicano art collective based out of LA that was doing performance works that were folding in and critiquing notions of Hollywood and stardom, also like radicalism and identity. And that group was really important, is really important to us.
And they consisted of Harry Gamboa, Patsy Valdez, Gronk, and Willie Herron the third.
Yeah, but I also think that there's like unnamed heroes and unnamed influences that we try to put names on in the book. Like Erica Llanera is not a real person, but she did exist in probably multiple forms in my life. And so there's both those artistic influences that exist in the real world, and then there are those that exist in collective.
Right. Yeah, very Jungian, and maybe a segue into this final question, which I want to say maybe has the regional at its core. This book, I want to point out to folks, is published by the Venerable City Lights in San Francisco. Sesshu just mentioned its late founder, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and yeah, there's I know that I responded to the. I mean, there's an obvious West Coast focus, but it feels imbued beyond the obvious, and I just wondered if you'd talk about the regional as a as part of the work. Yeah.
Well, again, part of it is to draw upon the histories of entire peoples who are kind of erased from the Hollywood imagination, because, for example, my Japanese American family who were incarcerated in concentration camps in World War II, and we grew up with that and never saw that represented in any way in history books or in anything. So we knew that like our entire histories were invisible in some way to the dominant narratives, and so yeah, the regional is an attempt to be specific about these generational histories and experience, actual human lived experience that people have gone through and never seen. Many generations have gone by with those people never seeing themselves represented in movies or whatever. But Arturo, maybe you should pick that up.
Yeah, really. I mean, when I kind of read the book again, so I got the copy and I read it through and looked at the pictures and everything, and I noticed something that maybe was like so close up to us when we were writing it and producing it that I didn't see it, so clearly. But there's a lot of, but I think the relation to a place that is, whose history has been erased and colonized and destroyed by an ongoing genocide and settler colonialism, is the base of the book. Like the one of the questions of the book is like, how do people survive, endure, and continue with this history? Like there's these dystopian passages in the book that talk about the wasteland of LA, but that wasteland started with colonization. That destruction started with colonization, and yet Tongva people, indigenous people from all over the Americas, immigrants to this land who had to leave devastation and destruction, endure and continue. And so I think a relation to place that starts with that understanding is different than a relation to place. Like the project becomes different as an artist when you relate to a place with an acknowledgement of that history. Yeah, I guess that's how I would respond to the question.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank both Arturo and Sesshu for herding whatever cats you had to herd to make this beautiful, beautiful book. And Karen for leading tonight's discussion. Thank you so much for being here. And before I say goodbye to the audience, let me thank everyone for not only watching and engaging with us tonight, but to giving some consideration to purchasing a book at a literary event whenever you attend one. Because I want to remind you that you support everyone involved when you do it right there. The authors, their publishers, their hosts, and a great independent bookstore based on the ground in a community. And I say that because this April 24th is Independent Bookstore Day, a national celebration that, as you know, did not happen last year. If you're watching tonight from anywhere near the Twin Cities, Rain Taxi has just announced our plans for this year's Independent Bookstore Passport, which we're creating with the support of great sponsors such as Coffee House, Grey Wolf, Milkweed, Mizna, and Free Spirit Publishing, along with many others. Check out the info on our website if you can join us, and if you're farther away, there's probably an independent bookstore near you that would welcome you. Thanks again to everyone for joining us for this conversation, and good night.